and the Get Real project with marketing and some program creation. This is our Trust Matters series, first webinar of the year. This, as everyone knows, is Network a Trusted Advisor. Take the work and stress out of it. Hosted by Andrea, Howe, and Stewart Hirsch. You can go to the next slide. So this is our first webinar of the series. We're going to have 4 throughout the year. Our next one is in May, hosted by Charles H. Green, CEO of Trusted Advisor Associates and co-author of the Trusted Advisor, one of the best-selling business books out there, Why Close Your Sales Health. So we're going to be recording this webinar, and we have 4 other webinars on our site. If you go to trustedadvisor.com/webinars, you can see the whole series. We'll send out a link after this in an email with links to the entire series, so you can watch all the webinars. So we encourage you to check out past ones and attend future webinars. And you can go to the next slide, Andrea. So everyone is on mute. We're going to keep you muted the whole time. If you have any questions, please use the chat. We're going to stop the webinar a few times to answer relevant questions, but at the end, we're going to officially have a Q&A, and this session is being recorded. We're going to send out a link after the webinar to share with your colleagues or if you need to review anything. And that's it for me. I'm going to pass it over to Andrea and Stewart.
Awesome, Jason. Thank you so much. So official hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Howe. I'm co-author with Charlie Green of the Trusted Advisor Fieldbook, as well as co-host of the Trust Matters webinar series. I'm delighted to have Stewart Hirsch joining us today. We're both recovering from our respective prior careers, myself as an IT consultant, Stewart as a firm and in-house lawyer. Don't hold that against him for too long. We are both tightly connected to Charlie Green and Trusted Advisor Associates, particularly Stewart in his role as the lead for the coaching practice for Trusted Advisor Associates, focusing specifically on business development and executive coaching. He has been described by many as a master networker. And I have to say, Stewart, in prepping for this webinar, I thought I knew some pretty good stuff about trust-based networking, but I learned so many things through our back and forth. So I'm excited that everybody here today will have the benefit of your experience. Stewart is joining us from snowy Massachusetts, as you can see by his background, which is his home. Although I heard through the grapevine you had the ability to transport yourself quickly to new locations.
Yeah, it's too cold for me here, so I'm going to switch.
All right, there we go. That's a much nicer view. So we're going to cover for you today, by the end, you'll have 6 very specific best practices for trust-based networking. And as Jason mentioned, we're trying a slightly different format with our webinars. We're going to tightly pack the first 30 minutes with content, include a question or 2, but we're saving the Q&A portion to begin at 12:30. So anybody who has to leave, we're sorry to see you go, but you can get the juicy content in 30 minutes. And then those who have the option to stay can stay on for another 15, and we'll take as many questions as we can. In the 12 years, almost 13 now, I need to update my numbers. I've been immersed in the topic of trust-based relationships. One thing, several things have fascinated me, but one in particular is the paradoxical nature of trust. And what I mean by paradox is simply the ways that trust and trust building appear to completely defy logic. And it turns out the best way to build trust, the best way to get next level results in your relationships is by being unconventional, doing things that seem wrong or illogical, or maybe simply are quite different from what we've all been taught. And the same very much is true for trust-based networking, or how to network trusted advisor style, which is what we're here to talk about today. Now, when I was a young consultant more years ago than I care to count, I was taught somewhat overtly, but largely through subtext about networking and about the goals of networking. And I'll just tell you that what I was taught wasn't exactly the best way or the best approach to networking. And I'm curious what you all have been taught. Is the goal of networking in particular? You know, what's the conventional wisdom out there that is the goal of networking? And if you would go ahead and type in your answer by chat, this is an opportunity to practice all the features of our virtual platform here. And I'm going to look for your answers. I'll type in mine as well. You want to send to everyone. So we've got, okay, so somebody got taught well, which was to establish a mutually beneficial relationship. For me, yeah, get contacts. Some of you are saying you were never taught. Get business cards. Thank you. That was exactly what I was taught as a young consultant, to collect as many business cards as you possibly can. And what's interesting is this is exactly the wrong paradigm if what you want to do is network in a trust-based way. In summary, while some of you are in the good camp in terms of good lessons, most of us have been taught that the goal of networking is to get something for ourselves in some way, shape, or form, whether it's cards, connections, leads, referrals, who knows what. Connections, something that will serve us in some way. And even though we're older now, all of us, and we know better, in many ways that paradigm still persists. And what Stewart and I have to share with you is a radically different perspective on it, because unfortunately, the old paradigm simply doesn't work well.
Yeah, so, and as Andrea said, many people have been taught to do networking in a certain way, and people don't want to do it because it just doesn't feel good. And maybe it feels manipulative or disingenuous. Also, the people we're meeting really don't like meeting you and feeling like they're about to be sold to just after meeting them. And I've seen that happen. And of course, results don't happen. And the last thing is people actually do talk. They talk about you and talk about your style. So it does have an effect. It looks like many of the people on the call do have the right, or do have a more trusted advisor perspective, but we're going to talk about how to even make that better.
Well, and I think, Stewart, if I may interject, even if we know the right thing to do, I think that sometimes the old paradigms and old behaviors can show up in subtle ways.
Yeah, we go to our default usually when stressed, for example, or when there's not enough time. So we are suggesting a trusted advisor approach. And when you use a trusted advisor approach, you get a different kind of reputation, a better one. You feel good about yourself. And of course, the responses are going to be more productive. It's nice when you become a go-to person because you're seen as someone who's a good networker. So the next question we're going to ask is, when and where do we network?
Yeah, let me also point out, if you don't mind, there's a really important phenomenon here, which those of you who know our trust-based programs know intimately, and it's the phenomenon of reciprocity, identified by Dr. Robert Cialdini in the book Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. And it's simply defined as the tendency to return a gesture. And when we approach anything, networking included, from a spirit of generosity, from a place of focusing on giving rather than getting something, what happens, and when we do that genuinely with no strings attached, the fascinating phenomenon is that we usually get so much more back in return than we ever gave. Now, the key is you've got to really do it with no strings attached, not giving because you know you're supposed to, because then you get more. Then our energy and our paradigm gets a little bit wonky. But you know, there is upside to networking in a trust-based way when you do need something. And it's okay to need something or need to ask for a favor. Your call's going to get returned much faster. Your referrals or your lead sources are, in fact, going to be higher quality, richer.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. I think the reciprocity is really one of the most important factors. We were talking about before, when and where do you network? We went through a list of places. Most people typically think of networking as going to those, what we call the rubber chicken dinners, you know, the charity events, the conferences, industry events, and so on. That's one place to network, but networking can happen anytime, anywhere. And so it happens on social media, which many use for promotion rather than networking. It can also happen with your neighbor. It can happen when you're on a plane, at a boarding gate, or anytime you're even in line. And I had this little standing in line story. I was standing in line with my kids, waiting for the Lego truck in Boston. And while we're waiting for the Lego truck to see these great creations, my little son loved Legos. He loved creating different things. He wanted to meet and be a Lego designer. And I asked one of the women who were checking people up on the line if there's a way that we could meet a designer. So she brought us into the truck eventually, a little while later, and introduced us to somebody who said, sure, I'll get you to see a Lego designer in a place in Enfield, Connecticut, where there's a Lego location. And we went with a friend. Someone was on the call today, actually. And my son met a Lego designer, and he developed a relationship. My son was 13 years old, just to be clear. And after meeting that Lego designer, who told him he was a cabinet maker before he became a Lego designer, my son decided to go to school, vocational school, become a cabinet maker. He gave up on being a Lego designer, but he has a 30,000 square foot building. He has a business which he co-founded in cabinet making, and he's making really beautiful things now. So while I have a lot of business connection stories, like how I met Charlie, and I'm sure, Andrea, how you met Charlie, networking can happen with anything that we do, and great things can happen from it.
Well, and what's, just to underscore that last point, Stewart, what I love about that story is it means that networking can be life-changing. So there's a bigger context to it. And I so appreciate the list that you have here of the times we don't typically think about networking and the opportunities that are out there, which leads us to the first of our 6 best practices, which is simply be open to opportunities. Networking doesn't just happen when you're quote unquote networking. Life presents opportunities for networking.
Yeah, absolutely. I did a program for a consulting firm, and people usually when they go on a plane, they sit and do their work. This person, after our program, decided, I'm not going to just sit and do my work. I'm actually going to talk to the person next to me. But this doesn't happen all the time, but it happened that the person that this individual consultant spoke with wanted to know more information, ended up hiring them, and for a very large job, actually, because they developed a relationship.
It brings to mind the expression, luck favors the prepared mind, and the
Absolutely.
value of being open to synergies and synchronicities.
Okay, so one of the main reasons you want to network is to meet people. And there's a couple of people that said that online in the chat box. New people and actually people you already know. Really connect with people for mutual benefit. And people actually talked about being mutually beneficial. It's really about having the right attitude. And that is about caring about other people and being curious, actually thinking about other people. And it takes the pressure off. We talked about reducing the stress. It takes the stress away. And I had a story which I shared with Andrea that she thought it would be good to share here, which was that I was at an event, and I saw someone standing all by himself. And so I walked up to him and I said, so tell me, what do you do? Because you can do that at events. You can say, what do you do? And he said, well, I'm a roving CFO. He looked really happy to see have someone talk with him. I said, gee, where do you rove? And he said, New England. I said, what kind of business? He says, a manufacturing company. He says, how's business? And he says, it's not so good. I said, really? Well, there's an opportunity to network here. And his response was, well, not really for me. I said, so why'd you come? And he said, well, I came to hear the speaker. So usually I say, well, I don't say it out loud, but why does anyone come to hear the speaker? They come to meet all the other people that are at the event, right? So I said, would you mind if I networked for you? And he gave me this incredulous look, like, do whatever you want, but don't do it near me. And so I walked around this room, and I met a bunch of people, and I asked a bunch of questions. I'll tell you the questions I asked because I was going to say these later. I'll share them now. What do you do? Where do you do it? Do you like what you do? How do you start doing what you do? And a couple others. Then I said, tell me more. So one guy I met, I said, what do you do? He says, I'm a roving CFO. I said, oh, neat. Where do you do that? He says, New England. I said, what kind of companies? He said, manufacturing. This is too good to be true, right? I said, so tell me, how's business? He said, it's great. I said, you ever get in a situation where you're doing your CFO thing and there's nobody in your COO thing, he's a COO, and there's nobody in the CFO slot? And he said to me, yeah, I get that all the time. Why do you ask? I said, come here, I want you to meet somebody. So I walked over, introduced him with the guy that was standing by himself still. And I said, you two ought to talk with each other because you do similar things for similar companies. Maybe you can do business together. They started talking. They actually did business together, I learned later. And I got nothing out of this except the joy. I felt good about myself for doing something good for other people. But imagine if I can do that with people I don't even know just because I'm at an event. Imagine if you had somebody in mind that you actually wanted to help when you're at an event and when you're meeting new people, when you're actually talking to somebody you know already. So Andrea, for example, you host parties ever?
I do.
I can't imagine you don't. What's the most important thing?
Well, I want to make sure that people feel comfortable with each other, right? So that's the uncomfortable spot. People are coming in. We know everybody, but they don't know each other, and it's getting them connected.
And how do you do that? Right, you get them connected. right? So if you think of yourself when you go into these rooms of people you don't know, think of yourself without any arrogance about it. Think of yourself like as if you're a host, and your goal is to help other people be comfortable. It changes how you feel about it, and it takes the stress out of it. So go with the goal of helping people, not with selling. And whatever else happens will happen, but if it takes the stress out of when you're at an event. And by the way, this applies everywhere, right?
I would say so. So that leads us to best practice 2 of 6, which is to be a host even when you're not officially the host of the event. There's another critical lesson, moving on, that comes from something I learned from David Maister. Many of you know, one of Charlie's co-authors on the book, The Trusted Advisor. So much great wisdom that David had to offer. And he wrote an article once called Young Professionals Cultivate the Habits of Friendship. And while it was targeted, the article, towards the younger generation, I would say everything he writes about in this article is relevant to all of us. And there's one point that he makes, well, a couple points that he makes in particular. First of all, David talks about friendship skills and the importance of not being best friends with all of your clients or colleagues, but applying friendship skills to your relationships. And he says, when you think about what it takes to be a good friend, it's not about you being as interesting as possible, or you impressing other people in a way, or them feeling good about you when they're around you. What he says is what's critical is that they feel great about themselves when they're around you. And that just seems to me like a simple, obvious thing. Simple isn't necessarily easy, and it isn't always the paradigm that we walk around with or the context that we create for our relationships as well as for our networking events. I think it's a great lesson to bring, especially when you're networking, while you're being a host, while you're engaging with people. What would happen, what would change if you made it your goal that they feel great about themselves when they're with you?
It's so interesting because you're so right, Andrea, because when you have that mindset, you can apply it anywhere, even on social media. Let's look at a couple of posts. And by the way, it's another way to network too, which is acknowledging others. So you made a post, do's and don'ts about client reach outs, and you got 8 comments and 26 likes, and by the way, 158 views of that post. And Pam Krulitz, who's a leadership coach and technology entrepreneur, responded to you as one comment. That was great, Andrea, right? So I bet that made you feel good.
It felt awesome. It always feels good.
How long do you think it took Pam to write that comment?
I don't know. 10 seconds, maybe?
Not even, probably not even.
Yeah.
I had a post, I posted about this webinar. So something as simple as posting about something you're doing, or in your case, it was either an article you wrote or it was I think that was an article from you, but it could be somebody else's where you can post something. And two people commented on this one, Jerry Rossman and Peter Vogel. And one said, thank you for sharing. And the other said something really nice about me, so I won't read out loud. And 958 views and a bunch of likes. What a great opportunity what they did, not only to make me feel good, but there was something I could do about that. And one thing I could do was reach out to them. So I reached out to Jerry, and I've known Peter for many, many years. I reached out to Peter and to Jerry, and I had a conversation with them. Gave me a reason to reach out. So if you're ever wondering how you can reach out to people you haven't talked to in years, either look at their LinkedIn and either like something or post a comment or even send a private message. It gives you a way, and people feel good about it because you've connected to them. And it doesn't take a lot of time.
Evidence, by the way, of you as master networker with your nearly 1,000 views. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. So, and this is all really about making people feel good about themselves. That's what it is. So let's go back to the event. One of the questions I get asked a lot is how do you get in and out of conversations, right? How do you do that? So we're going to talk about this generally, but before we even get to that, most people are so concerned about, wowing people and showing them what's so great about you. Or if I was me, what's so great about me? Actually, you impress them more by caring about the other person and about learning about them. So be interested. I talked earlier, I mentioned curiosity. So in business networking, you're meeting somebody new, like in the situation I described earlier, you need some basic questions to ask, right? So what do you do? Where do you do it? Do you like what you're doing? What do you do before you're doing what you're doing? And how do you get to do what you're doing? And of course, the very best question, tell me more, because that'll tell you everything. And meeting others is always a way to learn about them. And by the way, that also happens online. There are best practices for meeting people online. Here's a great one. I got this message. We all get these. I noticed we have some connections in common. This was good, actually. I want to say hello and suggest we connect. I wrote a blog called To Link or Not to Link, and it's like, I don't usually connect with people I don't know. And in this case, I said, this sounds very interesting. Okay, so we've got people in common, happy to connect, which I then did. I suspect many things, and I offered having a conversation. And then I got a response that was absolutely fascinating. You know, hey, thanks for connecting and have a great rest of day. Well, wonderful. Okay, what does that mean? Absolutely nothing. That's not the way to do it. But let me show you a way to do it. This is a woman, Debbie Henley, who's actually on the call today. And I met her because she wrote me this unbelievably great introductory email, thing to LinkedIn. You have an impressive background, a fascinating practice. Did that make me feel good? Yes. We share several friends and colleagues. Fabulous. Invited me to connect, and then say delighted to be connected to me on LinkedIn and share ideas. I had to connect with her. There was no choice. And then I said, I'm delighted to connect. You have my attention. And then would you like to have a conversation? Debbie and I have spoken a bunch of times already, and we're talking about how we can help each other. So, you know, what can be better? I mean, it's such a great opportunity. What can be better than to connect with somebody you've never met before, and if you're connected in the correct way? And this is a perfect way to do it. Thank you, Debbie, for sharing that. Okay, so
hey, before you go to the next step, I just want to underscore, Stewart, you said a question in the vein of being interested in them. It's one of my absolute favorites, which is, how did you get to do what you do? In other words, like, tell me a little bit about, you know, your history. And I find when I have the presence of mind to ask that question, I learned so many fascinating things about people that you wouldn't typically get to know in what might feel like a more superficial, you know, rubber chicken dinner.
Yeah, it is a really good question, and it's a way. You only have a few minutes when you meet new people like that. You really should not be spending like forever with any one person, but that's one of the ways to get to know somebody better. And as you're listening for the answer, you might find something else you have in common with that person. So then we get to this elevator statement. Everybody wants to know about this elevator pitch. It's not something that you're pitching yourself. It's really, how do you introduce yourself? First of all, it's better to have the other person introduce themselves first, wait to be asked, and then have something in mind to give the other person a sense of what you do that will elicit a response like, oh, that's interesting, tell me more. This one I love from one of Andrea's colleagues. You could read that one out loud. Yeah. Andrea, what do you do?
Yeah, I'm an accountant with a personality.
Now, I really want to know Andrea because, you know, and I'm not going to say anything negative about accountants. I love working with accountants. I have an accountant. But, you know, that's something people don't expect. So well, you don't use your opportunity.
He said it more deadpan than I did, as you would expect accountant typically would. So, you know, I immediately got that he was somebody with a sense of humor and a little bit different. And
yeah,
it was a great way.
Don't use this if he said, I'm an accountant, you need one, that would be a problem. You know, you don't want the first thing out of your mouth when you meet somebody to say, well, this is what I do. Can I, you know, and I do this for you and I do that for you, as if, you know, I'm hiring you. Make it a point. Do not sell. Just do not sell.
And if I may add, Stewart, I think, again, most of us, especially people who are drawn to our work and our webinars, we know better than to say, I'm an accountant, do you need one? But sometimes we don't know better. Wait, how am I phrasing this sentence? Sometimes we still think that, you know, we'll say, I'm an accountant, and we're thinking, do you need one? Or, oh, you know, maybe there's an opportunity here. You know, you see a big Fortune 100 company on their name badge, and, you know, it's natural to have that self-interest rise. And I think we got to work our mindset as well as our behaviors and our.
Andrea, I think that it's so right, but I think that goes back to the place where you were taught that that's what you're supposed to do. And then it's like, it feels scummy. You don't want to be that way. And then you don't want to go network. You don't want to be in a room like this because you don't want to do that because you don't like the way it feels. So we change our mindsets to, we're meeting people because we want to help them. By the way, one of the people we might be helping is us, but that's not the main goal. Right? So, by the way, someone asked me, what is the goal when you're talking to somebody? And the answer the person I asked, what's the purpose? And the answer was to keep the conversation going as long as you can. No, the goal is not to keep the conversation going as long as you can. This is not a contest. The goal is to determine if there's a value to continuing the conversation. Is there a reason? Is there somebody you can introduce this person to? Is there somebody this person can introduce you or somebody you care about to? Your goal is to determine whether or not you can talk further. So what's the exit strategy? After you determine whether or not there's something that should go on from there, then you could either set a next step or thank the person for spending time with you. And this is a short form of it. Nice to meet you, enjoy the event, or nice to meet you, look forward to following up. That's assuming you've set up a follow-up step of some sort. But to simply try and keep talking as long as you can is a waste of everybody's time.
So that leads us to 4 of 6, and Stewart, watching the clock, we got 5 minutes to get to our last 2 best practices, but number 4,
we can do it.
We can do it, is to enter and exit thoughtfully. By the way, if questions are brewing, please don't hesitate to go ahead and put them in the chat box. We'll get them queued up for our Q&A portion. Leaning towards the next one, number 5, Stewart, you're quick to point out a challenge that occurs both at rubber chicken dinners, as you call it, I love that phrase, as well as other networking opportunities. And I know I'm guilty of this. It's the tendency to gravitate towards the people we already know, simply because it's more comfortable. And you point out, rightly so, I think, that not only is that not good for us, it's not good for them.
Right, well, you already know them. So first of all, if there's somebody you already know, absolutely say hello. We're not, sometimes when I do a program on, on working a room, I'll say, well, what about this? What about these? We're doing this very quickly. So yes, if you see somebody you know, don't ignore them, right? Pay attention to the people that are in your life, but don't spend a lot of time with them because you already know them. You can always have a conversation with them. A little harder if you're at a conference in another country or another state or city where you don't see them very often, but still reconnect and then find new people that you can meet. And then the question is, well, how do I do that? Right? Well, if you get there early, then people don't walk into rooms in lots of clumps of people. They walk in usually one at a time. When they sign in, meet people early, and then when you find people in clumps later, you can catch somebody's eye and they'll usually let you in. Don't try to interrupt a conversation when there's 2 people talking intensely with each other. But use this opportunity to meet more people. And by the way, some of those people you meet are going to be helpful to somebody else that you know in your life, including other people you may have met at the event itself. Short version of the answer.
It's a great
Very
one.
short.
So that leads us
use the opportunity to meet new people. You already know the people you came with. Yeah, we don't have to spend time on this. Exactly right. By the way, once you've connected, what do you do then? Okay, so then what do you do? Well, first of all, I think you debrief after the event. Either set up an initial follow-up with people. Sometimes when I meet with people, we ask the question, would you like to link in? Before I've left the room, people have linked in with me. I think that's very cool when that happens. But some people don't think it's cool, so it's okay, wait a little bit. But promptly, whatever you said you were going to do it. If you said you were going to follow up with a phone call, with an email, with a LinkedIn invitation, do it. And if you forget, and people do forget, then use a caveat. We call it caveats in the trusted advisor world, which is rather than just ignore it and wait for it to go stale, don't let the things go stale. All you have to do is write a note and say, I didn't get back to you right away like we said. Can we do it now? And you have that as a conversation starter. And then, of course, it's important to stay in touch with that person if there's value to talk again. So, and one thing you could do, by the way, if you know there's value to be speaking with a person, is you could say, should we put something on our calendar? Should we put it on as a placeholder, or should we make it real, to coin an organization that Andrea's involved with deeply? And so either one of those things will work. And you can always reschedule or move it.
I appreciate you saying all that, Stewart, because I think, while what you're describing could be lumped in the what I call the no-duh category, like of course you should follow up, I think far too often collectively as business people we do not. And I know I individually, if I don't follow up right away and then it lags on my to-do list, then it just tends to never happen, and then it weighs on me. So I think prompt follow-up is key.
Yeah, when I'm coaching, Andrea, sometimes people will call me and say, I met this person like 3 months ago at a conference, and I said I was going to call, and I didn't call, and or I forgot to follow up, and I didn't do anything. I guess it's stale now. I really want to do it. What should I do? Well, the answer is do it anyway, but just do it in an appropriate way. And there's lots of different ways to do it. We talked about a couple. There's many others.
Paradoxically, actually, it gives you an opportunity to show that you really do care. 3 months have passed, and you care enough to get over your own embarrassment. Say, hey, I'm embarrassed.
Absolutely.
I promised to follow up, and I didn't. Here I am.
Yes.
I hope it's better late than never. Or sometimes
Absolutely.
We have a lot of questions building up. Do you want to go for one or two? Do you want to wrap up the content portion?
Let's do that. We got one more slide, and then let's turn it over to questions. So, because the other thing I think we don't generally tend to do well enough is to continue to follow up and to continue to find ways to find the small touch points, to stay top of mind, to stay connected. This is a picture, by the way, that's Stewart up there with his wife Thelma, rock climbing. So with rock climbing, you take turns belaying. You're helping each other on a regular basis. And so it is with trust-based networking. I'm a big fan, for example, of calling past clients with no agenda other than to say hello, or reaching out to colleagues simply to say hello. You can do a drive-by hello on LinkedIn, or that can be your subject line in an email. I think simple acts like that are vastly underestimated in terms of their value, provided that you're doing it from a spirit of generosity, like you really are just reaching out to say hello.
And one example might be one person helps the other, like in belaying, one person helps the other, we talk about it, and then we have another call and say, well, let's talk about you. And so we do take turns with that, sometimes in the same conversation, sometimes in another one. That's one form of networking.
So we've got our official list now of our 6 best practices, adding number 6 to the end. Keep connecting. By the way, just quick commercial, very quick, in case you all aren't familiar with the work that we do, leading workshops, coaching, online programs, and so forth. We also have, I'm excited, if you haven't already discovered Charlie's new podcast series, it's a good one, and he's got a new one out called Overcoming Networking Awkwardness. Links to this and other resources will be shared with you, assuming that you are registered for the webinar. We'll be sending out an email later this afternoon, so you'll get access to the podcast, a bunch of articles written by Stewart, Charlie, and me. Now, if you do need to leave us now, Jason, go ahead and put up the poll so we can get a sense of
sorry about that.
This has been so far, but let's do questions. Which
Sure.
one?
Should we actually finish this in 30 minutes? Unbelievable.
34. So.
Our first question comes from Kevin. He asks, how can introverts overcome the reluctance to proactively network?
Good question.
Okay, so I'm an extrovert, but I've talked to a lot of introverts, and Andrea, I guess I'll ask you to kind of share with me your thoughts on this. But when you take away the stress out of networking and make it about others, it makes it so much easier to be talking with people. Of course, from an introvert perspective, you want to make sure you have your energy before you do that. So Andrea's going to maybe share a little bit about that. And sometimes you need to be by yourself for a couple of minutes when if you're in a room. But use your energy to be thinking about helping other people, not about yourself. And that has very little to do with the introverted or extroverted in terms of how you get and use your energy. Andrea, just from the energy perspective, maybe that's or another perspective if you have one.
Well, my other perspective, because I am an introvert, and I usually like the big chicken dinner events, rubber chicken dinners, I dread going into them. One of the ways that I manage it, first of all, I choose them carefully, so I don't waste my energy. And I also find, more introverted ways to engage at big events. I like engaging more one-on-one. And I think your point, Stewart, about focusing on them, I'm not happy to be a great listener. It doesn't take a lot of energy. I love engaging with extroverts. They do all the work. So if I can find ways to, ask, so, what do you do and how did you end up there? that typically helps. I also find, quite frankly, even though I have mixed feelings about social media, it actually suits me in many ways as an introvert to be doing more connecting on LinkedIn. It tends to take less physical energy in the moment. So, and the quick ways to just be in touch and stay in touch, the quick messages, text messages, emails, I find those aren't nearly as draining, and very often they're very energizing.
So the next question is, what strategies do you have when others won't leave your side at a networking event to allow you to get out there and meet new people?
Good question.
That is really hard. So that happens. So I guess such a great question. So we got to think about who the others are, right? If the others are your colleagues who've come with you, I would do a little bit of prepping in advance with them as to what your goals are for the event, that you want to meet new people and you want to help them meet new people. If it's someone superior to you in your organization and having them asking them to leave your side in any way could cause you job issues. Well, that's a whole separate conversation, which I probably don't want to have here because there's a lot more things you might need to do. But one is prepping them. The other is to when you meet new people, introduce and say something really interesting and exciting about the person that you're with, so that the person that you're talking with will engage in conversation, and that makes them more comfortable. Then every once in a while, check back and make sure the person's okay. If you need to separate them so that you can let the other person go, say, hey, there's some other people I'd like to introduce you to, and make some additional introductions. So use this as an opportunity to make introductions. That's one strategy. I'd probably come up with a bunch of more, but that one seems to be the one that's the one that's coming to mind now.
That's great. The next question is, how do you not undersell yourself if you have a tendency for that? That's something I actually personally, I sometimes forget to interject myself.
Say that question again, please.
So if you have a tendency to undersell yourself in networking, you kind of just listen to the other person and maybe not get your own services in there, what you're trying to project yourself in.
Well, or maybe being overly humble.
Sure.
Yeah, so I have one response. Andrea, do you have something to respond to that? Because I have a couple of ideas.
Go for it.
Okay, so one thought is I want to change the languaging here about underselling. There's a presumption built into that language that your goal is to sell yourself. Your goal is not to sell yourself. Your goal is to help other people around you. And so if you're really thinking you're underselling yourself, then let's step back and say, why am I really here? And that might change your perspective. If the issue is that someone asks you what you do, and you say you are less of a role than you have, that's potentially problematic. So I actually do a program. Women have a tendency to do this. I do a lot of work in the implicit bias arena, and I once brought a general counsel into a program and I wanted to test how this would work. And I had the person say, this general counsel of a very large company, what do you do? And the response was, I work in a bank. Okay, and what do you do in the bank? Well, I'm working in the legal department. So are you a secretary? Well, no, I'm one of the lawyers. Eventually we got to the fact this person's the general counsel. I think if you have to be honest with yourself as to what your role is and what you do, not bragging about it, but talking about what you do in a very positive way. And if you need to practice that in advance with somebody, please do, and find somebody that does support you and cares about you and will listen to you describe what you do in that kind of a way. But I usually tell people, don't tell people what you do unless they ask you, because the truth is, if they're not asking, they're probably not interested.
I think just to clarify, we're seeing in chat some clarifications around the question, that it is in the context of an elevator intro, and especially for women who tend to be overly humble.
Yeah, and
so
I caught
your general
that.
counsel example it's a poignant one, and it's sad because I think it's all too prevalent, and I find that tendency in myself as well. I there are things, yeah, I noticed that. So I
Well,
think
we're going to work on yours, right?
we are. So part of the answer is, Stewart, you're going to help me with my elevator intro.
Absolutely.
I also think a way around it a bit is to find ways to really show your passion for what you do. So sometimes that's a way I get around my concerns of coming across as overly arrogant, or just my own discomfort with kind of tooting my horn, as somebody wrote in chat. If you don't toot your horn, there's no music. But to make sure that how I'm talking about what I do and expressing my passion for it, I think that actually conveys credibility in its own way.
Yeah, I think you're right about the passion. You show that you actually care about what you know, who you are and what you do. But not too much bragging, because then the person you don't want to turn the other person off. But if you're not willing to say what you do, that's problematic too. You got to find that medium.
Being overly humble is no more trustworthy than being a braggart.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump to a different. I'm going to skip over one question because I think this one's has a little more depth. But someone asked, what if a student is networking with an executive? But I think it could be anybody that's kind of seen as an underling to a superior, and the student doubts that he or she has anything to offer this person.
Okay. So Andrea, you want to do that? You want me to do it?
I think, look, to me, and you tell me if you feel differently, Stewart. I would go to wow, what a great opportunity to learn from them, right? It's not about what I have to offer them necessarily. People love to have other people be curious about them, be interested in them. This is a great place for the question, how did you get to where you are? And you might, in listening to their answer, I wouldn't underestimate, no matter what level you are, what age you are, the network that you have, the connections that you have. You never know. Maybe you can't help them in a business context because you're not a C-suite executive, you're not a peer. But maybe in conversation they mention something from some other aspect of their life, their personal life, and you could in fact be helpful in that regard. There's no shortage of ways that human beings can be helpful to human beings, and no shortage of ways that people enjoy talking about their journey and how they got where they are.
That's absolutely right, Andrea. The only thing I would add to that is you actually really do have something to add, because you have a different set of connections and you have a different set of skills, especially younger people with older people. The technology skills are so much greater, and a lot of people that are not as tech savvy as a younger person are just thrilled to talk to a younger person and learn things. So you do have something to offer. Finding it may be a little more, you may think it's a little more difficult, but I've been surprised at some of the, how much I hear older people enjoying, and when I say older, I mean just older than the other person, enjoying having that conversation.
So we have one last question here, and if anybody wants to ask more, we have time for one or two more. But someone's asking, what if somebody has like a direct request? That this question is request to serve your company or school in his case. Can you just say, here's the opportunities? I guess the question is, should you make a relationship with this person and filter them out, or should you just pass the buck and move them down the line?
I'm not sure I get the question. Do you have it, Andrea?
I don't either. No, sorry, Jason. I thought what you were originally saying is there ever a time that you can quote unquote sell, or when they do make a request for information about you and what you do, is it okay to share it? But then it took a different turn. Oh, you're on mute.
And now you're muted.
I'm sorry. The question is, what if others are directly motivated to serve your company, and then in parentheses, school? Right. Can you just say, here's
so if you're on the receiving end of somebody, that's what you're asking, right? And if you're on the receiving end of what we would consider a not optimal networking request, what do you do with it? Is that the question?
That's the question, right? Can you just say, here's the job page, here's, move on.
So every human being has value, right? And if someone is asking, I would do what we do. We talk about it. You talk about a trusted advisor all the time, Andrea and Charlie. Tell me what's behind that. What's going on? It's usually, if they're looking for a job, maybe they're desperate. Then talk to them about their needs. You may not be able to pass them on to somebody, but see how they act, how they react, how they interact with you. a person's asking you and it's just not going anywhere, then eventually you have to end the conversation and move on. I'm really glad to meet you. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the event or something similar. But if there's something there that has potential for, you just never know, has potential that you could be helpful in a different way even, you never know. Be open to opportunities, as we said earlier. Andrea, do you have anything for that?
I don't. We do have another question, so I'm debating, Jason, I guess we should officially call it because we're at time,
Yeah,
and we can hang out a little longer for anybody else who would like to.
Yeah, I mean, I think if anybody, if Andrea, if you want to follow up with any questions, after the call, or Stewart, that's an option. But there's one more.
Yeah, we can stay on.
Do you want to stay on for one more question?
I think it's, whatever you want to do.
We'll bid official goodbye to those of you who have to go, and thank you for joining. Stay tuned
thank you.
The recording, the links, and everything else that we'll be sharing.
We got a lot of positive feedback from this. It's been great.
Yeah.
What if you get a book of the people at a networking event? Is it appropriate to get in touch with people in that book? Yes, I guess it'd be like a list of attendees, right? In some sort of.
So that's such a great question, and there's I think there's a relatively simple answer to it. You do not solicit people from the book. That's just wrong and solicitous and kind of inappropriate, and nobody likes it. On the other hand, if you've met people that you see in the book, that's a great way, because you then have their contact information. Maybe invite them to link in, maybe send an email if you've met them there, or if there's somebody there that you would have liked to have met, you could say, I saw your name in the book. I wish I could have met you. Here's why, and have a really good reason to reach out. What some people do is they will send emails to everybody in the book and say, here's what I do. And by the way, if you ever need me, keep me in mind. And that's a no-no. That's inappropriate. Andrea?
No, I think you covered it.
Great. Well, I think that wraps it up. Thank you for everybody who's attending. Please continue to follow our webinar series, our TrustMatters webinar series. Our next one's in May. You'll get links in an email to see the next upcoming webinars. We have one more coming in September and another one in December. And thanks for everybody's participation. Thank you, Stewart and Andrea, for hosting. It's been a great session. I think everybody learned a lot.
Thanks,
and
Jason.
Andrea, it's been great to work with you. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Thanks, Jason.
Always a pleasure, Stewart.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.